Hi, I'm Case Lowe, co-host of the Open the Voice Gate podcast. The one question I'm constantly asked when it comes to Dragongate is how do I get into the promotion? Well, stop asking and start listening to the Open the Voice Gate podcast, released every Wednesday on the Voices of Wrestling podcasting network. For exclusive news and show reviews, look no further than the leader in Dragongate coverage, Open the Voice Gate.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling podcasting network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
To the highway in a brand new day. Over the rainbow, gotta let it go. So far. Fast to finger down. Stars tonight together. Here everyone is singing. 你看到我就怕，头皮发麻，我的手。
Welcome back to Open the Voice Gate for April 21st, 2026. We are members of the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network feed or on our own dedicated Open the Voice Gate feed, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on social media at Open Voice Gate. And if you'd like to donate to the show, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing site. You click the red box that says sponsor this podcast, and you can set up a one-time or reoccurring donation. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts. It's your old pal, Mike Spears, joined alongside your other host, Case Lowe. And Case, we are recording, like, it's interesting in a way, like how drastically a year is difference between where we are talking now versus where we were talking this time last year, and that just kind of hit me right now as we were getting going. But how are you doing, man? How was your WrestleMania weekend this year?
Oh God, it was so busy with doing other stuff that wasn't WrestleMania weekend related, so it was fine. I mean, I caught up on everything Dragongate related. I didn't really feel the need to pay attention to anything else, although this West Coast Pro show that, as of this recording, hasn't been released yet. I'm hearing such rave reviews about that I will eventually check that out when that gets uploaded. But WrestleMania weekend this year probably meant less to me than it has ever, because there were even a few years there, like during the pandemic, where I sort of wanted to swear it off and not pay attention to it. And then, in like 2021, I remember going like, I'm not going to pay attention to any of this. This is all so stupid. I can't believe anybody's running. And then that weekend came around and I was like, well, I kind of want to watch this Pit Fighter show. And, from there, the ball got rolling. But this year, it was largely stuff that was very unappealing on paper. I have some bigger picture thoughts that I'll share here momentarily. I do have an Open the Voice Gate update for you, Mike, that you don't know about, that nobody knows about, that I figured we'd open up the show talking about, which is nothing drastic, nothing major. Obviously this week we're going to talk about Dragongate's presence at WrestleMania weekend and the state of what DG USA might look like going forward. We'll do a big Golden Colosseum preview for the big show happening this weekend on the Dragongate Network. Last week, we did those days. We covered March through June of 1996, the formation of Kai En Tai Deluxe, a very fun episode to do. I really enjoyed doing that. And obviously, you and I are sort of in the sweet spot, the prime of Michinoku Pro right now. And I'm anticipating getting to the next episode, the next episodes. There's a lot of things that are occupying my mind with Michinoku Pro right now. I had a listener reach out to me earlier this week. I don't believe they'll ever hear this because I believe they are exclusively a Those Days listener and not an Open the Voice Gate listener. And they notified me that there is some additional spring 1996 Michinoku Pro footage on a rarely distributed comp tape that we did not cover in our last episode, and it would have fit into that timeline. So I don't know if it's going to be next week or the week after, but sometime before the next full-length episode of Those Days, you and I are going to have to do a 0.5 episode, a half
Yeah.
episode. And we're going to have to talk about some of this footage that I just got my hands on today that I will make
Hell
sure
yeah.
when we talk about it that everybody is able to get their hands on it. I'll upload it to YouTube. But thank you to that man who notified me that there was some footage that we missed. I saw no notation of this comp tape until this person reached out to me and said, hey, very few people seem to realize that this exists. I love the show. Here you go. And so we'll talk about that. I don't know if it'll be next week or the week after, but sometime here soon, we have some additional June 1996 Michinoku Pro to talk about.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. I feel like that we're so much into that sweet spot there that in some ways, given that, like, not to completely just tangent onto that too much, it feels like, at least like in the moment as we're going through it, there should be more footage for this time period, especially considering that's the lead up to the biggest show in the promotion's history, that as of at least our chronology we're 5 months away from. And I'm glad that at least a listener has reached out for it. But I feel like that part of like the Those Days project and something taking on this thing is like it's an ongoing process for the two of us, like with my desire to go into these biographies and then all this footage that kind of pops up. Then there might be like good times for us to pull out a half episode, a side story, and something like that. So I'm totally up for that. I know that the Dragongate schedule, at least to close out this month, we are going to be probably pretty much geared towards that, with Golden Colosseum happening before the next time we record, and then with all of that. But I there's few things that I enjoy right now in 2026 than a 1990s comp Japanese wrestling comp tape. So I'm here for that, and thanks to that listener for reaching out to you.
Yeah, it's fantastic news there. So we have that to look forward to. I think you and I are both really into Those Days stuff right now, and sort of depending on the way that maybe this weekend goes for Dragongate, maybe you and I get even more invested into Those Days. But before we break down Golden Colosseum, we had a lot of Dragongate USA, both the show proper, the Gate of Sin City, and some sporadic appearances from their wrestlers throughout the weekend on WrestleMania weekend. This is now the third year in a row that Dragongate has had a very active presence at WrestleMania weekend. I think 2024, specifically with the ETU show, but also the Dragongate versus CMLL tag at the WrestleCon show that I seem to like more than most people. I think that was a proof of concept that, hey, there's still some level of interest among a certain type of wrestling fan for Dragongate in WrestleMania weekend. I think all things considered last year, and given the crowd participation or lack thereof this year, I think you and I specifically, and this might sound incredibly egotistical to some, but I think you and I might have to pat ourselves on the back a little bit for raising the roof and raising the volume at the Dragongate USA shows last year and trying to get that crowd to play along with what at the time were the Z-Brats antics. And then, I feel like we came away from 2025 going like, okay, there's something here. There's something to yearly Dragongate USA shows. There's even something to the Dragongate USA collab shows like they did with Pro Wrestling Revolution this year. And as we got into 2026, and I'll give you the floor here to give your big picture thoughts, but I am now wondering if the juice is worth the squeeze, and perhaps Dragongate once again maybe becomes a landlocked promotion going forward.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how the next 12 months play out in the overall indie wrestling landscape before me really saying like, all right, it's time to pull back the ships. I do think it's kind of interesting how this year I remember in 2025 when we would like be talking to folks like Ho about like the week itself and what they've been up to. It was like, oh yeah, no, this kind of grueling experience of travel and then getting into a bus and going 6 hours to get to Vegas. And this year, at least with like the Defy show and then the Pro Wrestling Revolution aided tryout, there at least seems to be like a level of structure away from Mania weekend that I think is really encouraging. Of course, this Defy versus Dragongate crossover show from the 10th has not been released for video on demand anywhere yet. So we can't really evaluate that. But I heard at
No, and
least
quite honestly, I'm not interested in covering it at this point. I think they've had a week to get that show out, and I would have liked
it's
to have
left
talked
the
about it this
zeitgeist.
week. Yeah, but the West Coast Pro Show has so much buzz that I'm going to make a point of watching it when it comes out because I've now been anticipating that. Whereas the
Mhm.
Defy show came and went, I'm sure it was lovely. I'll watch it at some point, but especially with Golden Colosseum next week, we already have a full slate, and I'm just not interested in covering something that isn't going to be released in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and that's a shame because there are acts on that show I'm really kind of into. Like, I thought Sovereign looked very good last year against Dragongate talent, and there were not any matchups with them this year with Dragongate talent. So, getting it, there was a bit of the bummer for that, and then the Brian Keith versus Asumu main event. Of course, that's something I'm really into, but the fact that it's not out 11 days later, I think, is completely missing the moment. But the fact still stands that they were able to kind of make this into a week for them. And then coming out of the tryout, they got a South Carolina wrestler by the name of Tristan Moody, who passed the tryout, and they're trying to figure out when he might come to Japan. And everyone's really kind of jazzed about that. And those are the kind of things, at least for me, when I look at Dragongate in North America, at least like US and Canada, those are the kind of things that give me a little bit more encouragement towards the future, because at least the way that I look at Mania Weekend as it relates to Vegas, there was fun stuff, and there were things that I, sitting at home after watching this, I would have been like, that would have been a fun thing to kind of see in person. But it does, in a lot of ways, that you have Dragon Gate kind of coming into this weekend with a odd roster selection that kind of, in a way, was not very good for stuff setting up Heat in America, but also not very good with what was going on in Japan leading up to building up to Golden Colosseum. But also, in a certain kind of way, I think that Dragon Gate's kind of enter the weekend at that level of momentum, and the indies is not here to boost it up. And even though I think that there were some fun matchups coming out of the weekend away from the Dragon Gate USA show that I'm like, okay, that was kind of cool, that was neat. It was not the win underneath the sails that I thought that these shows would kind of need to have, I feel like, for it to be an overall net positive for a WrestleMania weekend. And then you also kind of look at it with like the air of, what is everyone going to do next year because of the fact that Mania is in Saudi Arabia and all of the travel with that and the backlash towards that as well. And then it remains kind of an open question, I feel like, what they should be doing over the next 12 months into what theoretically would be like a Resival or a collective kind of style appearance for them, kind of moving out of the year. The one thing I do kind of wonder, Case, that I would like to kind of open this more up, and I'm kind of done my rant here. What is the thing that always kind of surprised me over the last 5 years? And it was something that, at least during the Everything Elite days, I was always very kind of on the pulse about. But as we are like in 2026, just the way that things are, things have changed with this. I'm really stunned that there's never been like a real dedicated AEW piggyback. And what would Dragon Gate USA look like if it was attached to something that was more AEW affiliated versus Mania being what it is, its Q level being what it is, and just the general badness coming out of Vegas this year.
Few different things there that I want to hit on. In terms of the AEW thing, I mean, Game Changer would run All Out Weekend in 2021 and 2022, I think, because I know I stumbled into one of those shows with.
I did during like the COVID years, and it was like one of the most like depressing experiences in my wrestling life. Was like masking up and going to like because was that like at that indoor soccer arena?
Yeah, because there was a night that I was with our friends of the show, Dr. Keith and Sean Sloan, and we went out and we hit 2 different concerts in one night. We timed it perfectly where we saw the first bands on the first show that we wanted to see, and then the headliner on the second show that we wanted to see. And then I got talked in to going to one of those Game Changer shows that same night. And the only reason it was worth it was that I met Suit Williams that night, and otherwise it was a complete and utter waste of time. I found WrestleCon's tweet today about, them not really being sold on the idea of WrestleMania happening in Saudi Arabia next year to begin with. And then also still seemingly sort of this loyalty to WrestleMania weekend being very interesting. And I think part of the logistical challenge there is that the biggest AEW show of the year, once again, will be in the United Kingdom. It won't be on U.S. soil. And I think that complicates things. But I think there was a chance last year with All In Texas to do a dry run of this sort of thing, do a smaller scale version of this just to see what sort of audience is there. And they didn't do that. And I don't really understand why. I mean, for
the
my
only company that ran was Tokyo Joshi, about an hour, 15 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
And they still managed to get 1,000 people there for that weekend. That was the only thing that happened during All In weekend last year.
And for my sensibilities, I mean, I feel at this point fully that WrestleMania weekend has been divided into 2 types of people. Whereas, even 10 or 15 years ago, I think you had the people that would travel to go see Ring of Honor, to go see whatever Gabe was doing, and then to go to WrestleMania. And I think we've completely split that crowd into the people that go to Mania, that are going to Access, that are going to all of the WWE affiliated things, and then the people that are there for Dragongate and Defy and West Coast and whatever else is running. And I think they've completely segregated that fan base. And so if you're WrestleCon, to me, it's a little odd. I mean, I would really like to have a weekend, and selfishly, I'll use Chicago as the example, but if there was a Chicago weekend where, let's just take Dragongate off the table because of the New Japan relationship. But I was promised a Thursday CMLL show, a Friday New Japan show, a Saturday Ring of Honor show, and a Sunday AEW pay-per-view, I can't imagine not going to all 4, or at least 3 of the 4, depending on the lineup of those shows. And if you wanted to bounce off of, again, Defy and West Coast and whatever else is running, AAW, I'd be happy to support them if there was a Midwest weekend where they wanted to throw their ring in the hat. I would be into that, because I think at this point the crowd of indie wrestling or small room wrestling or global wrestling is completely different from the WrestleMania crowd. And I think that's a big conclusion that a lot of people came to this weekend, is just, are we sure that this is the best audience to do some of these shows in front of?
Yeah, and I would argue, at least from my perspective, of basically, other than Chicago Ridge, have been one of the people who would travel to Manias just for Ring of Honor shows in the late 2000s, the Dragongate USA shows in the 2010s, and then in the 2008 and 2009 pre-COVID years with Gabe's WWN thing alongside of WrestleCon. Like, there was always a big group, and I know that people like Joe Lanza, especially like in that time period, that would just plant themselves at those 2 venues. And I was one of those kind of people that you would show up on Thursday or Wednesday night, and you would leave Sunday morning. And there was always kind of that group, but I would say that it's whittled down a whole lot over time. Like at least I did not watch any GCW mainline shows. I watched just Dragongate related things throughout the Mania weekend. It just feels like that and I just think about New Orleans back in 2018 and shoving 2,000 people into a room in Kenner for Will Ospreay versus Walter, and then also at the same time on that same day getting 900 people at a Revolution Pro show at the Sugar Mill. And those crowds, like we witnessed last year outside of GCW shows, those crowds were not at the same level of pre-COVID. And I think just observing from what I could see on stream, and I know that there were people there who kind of reported this kind of as well, it's not even like approaching like 900 with these shows. You're approaching.
Well, there's too many shows. I mean, everything is on top of each other. And I'll make my thoughts on this quick, but look, I thought Game Changer completely embarrassed themselves again. Anybody that's listened to this podcast knows my feelings on this. I am
almost took out Alec Price on Wednesday. Yeah.
You know, what I'm about to say, some people might think is unfair. I am of the belief. I think Brett Lauderdale is like a bad person at this point. I think the lack of quality control and the danger, and you and I are far from the safety police. I mean, we both laughed at people when they got up in arms about that Naito Ibushi spot 7 years ago. And it's not like my thoughts on this have radically changed. But when I see stuff like the Atticus Kogar moonsault onto the chair spot, and I see the horrid Alley Cat Effie match, which I did watch, and it was just as bad as everybody said it was. I can't believe that stuff like this is allowed. But I think to your point about the attendance, I mean, again, there's too much stuff happening. Everything's on top of each other. And somebody made the great joke over the weekend of, this is a 4-hour stretch where there's nothing good on. And then the 3 shows that I want to watch are all on top of each other whether it was Thursday night or Friday night, I don't remember, but that's become the way that things work here, which is really unfortunate. But also, Game Changer, I think, has less buzz than ever before. The spring break concept has less buzz than ever before. And so if you're going to anchor your weekends around Game Changer, I think you're going to have diminishing returns because people have seen this now and it's not getting better. It's only getting worse. The charm is gone. This is, a lot of it to me felt like December 2000 ECW vibes. Not saying that GCW is going to cease operations, but, if they wanted to run, the parallel ECW comparison, there were a few years there where they had real energy, like 95, 96, 97 ECW, and that energy is gone. And I find them to be really embarrassing. And I find them, and as I've said this for years now, I find them to be bad for wrestling. And I find the people involved to be bad for wrestling. And I think wrestling is worse because Game Changer continues to anchor these weekends. I would say to have the pull that they have, but I don't think they have pull anymore. I mean, I understand they run shows. They run more shows than ever before. I think that's great for them. If anybody is making money off of Game Changer, congratulations. But I think their time as the kingpin of this weekend has subsided. The problem is that I don't really think the ecosystem is going to allow anybody else to come in and sort of take the stronghold that they have. So
yeah, there's no one that is promoting that is coming close to the kind of crowds that they have outside of your vanity kind of people that like will book WWF 1990s wrestlers for like those kinds of shows or lucha libre shows. Like no one is really drawing like insane crowds or houses, so there's not really a competitor. And even if there was a competitor, there's not a competitor that has the infrastructure or at least the level of social pull to put together like this kind of weekend. Like we almost had it, and it was a shame that both Prestige and Deadlock no longer are in business because
I mean that was one of my big takeaways last year, and this is something that I've said since the beginning when Dragongate first sent Yamato and Shun over to GCW in 2022 was I just think they're working in front of the wrong crowd. I don't think the game change. It's almost the same as had Kenta and Marufuji worked a lot of mid-2000s CZW instead of Ring of Honor, where they could have given you the best performances ever. You could have run Kenta versus Low-Ki, in Ring of Honor like they did at Final Battle 2005. But if that show takes place at Cage of Death 2005 instead, then Noah probably shrugs their shoulders and goes, okay, well, this isn't worth it. The crowd didn't care. The crowd wasn't into this. And I feel the same way watching Dragongate in front of that Game Changer promoted crowd where, I mean, last year, again, it felt like a Herculean effort on behalf of literally the people that we know to get the rest of the crowd invested in that main event on the Wednesday show, that 6-man tag, the way that it ended up going. And this year, they didn't really have that. And I just think, again, if Deadlock and Prestige and West Coast were running, and if they were running that same building last year, that Meet Las Vegas building, things might have been different, but that wasn't the case. And so I don't think Dragongate is ever going to get an incredible response as long as they're working in front of Game Changer fans, because Game Changer fans want something else, and it's something completely foreign and abstract to me, and I don't really understand it. But there's a proven track record now to say that this gets over in front of this crowd and this does not. And unfortunately, I think Dragongate falls into the this does not camp.
Yeah, and it just kind of feels like that there is now, outside of the PWR relationship, which will continue ongoing, but like PWR was not promoting in this weekend, and Defy, which, you know, this was like the first Defy show in like 7 months. It seems like that's not necessarily a promotion that's necessarily active recently. It just feels like the partners aren't out there. And I feel like that's very similar to a conversation that we had last year, other than the hopes that that the tenuous situation of Prestige, West Coast, and Deadlock would continue, and that obviously didn't. Any other kind of big picture thoughts before we get into the footage itself?
Well, let's talk about the names that came over, and more importantly, the names that didn't. You know, I was on the fence. It was going to be really hard for me with some work stuff that was happening. It ended up, you know, I think it actually would have been impossible with the way that things unfolded anyways. But, you know, I was on the fence about going, waiting to see what talent was going to be announced, with the idea that if Jackie Kame and Rito were coming over to America, that I would have made a much stronger effort to get to Vegas. I know I'm not alone in that thought.
Yeah, I had like 3 names in mind, and those 2 were 2 of them that if 2 out of the 3 names were called, I would make my way at least out for the DG USA show, and it was not a lineup that intrigued me whatsoever.
You know, I think for the lapsed Dragongate fan, somebody that is going to maybe pay attention to Golden Colosseum but hasn't been watching the Corkins or anything beneath that this year, I know that the lack of Shun Skywalker seemed to hurt their intrigue. I get that to some degree, but I also think if you were going to bring Shun this year, you would have to bring Homare over, and I didn't anticipate Homare coming over, so that didn't surprise me.
And what would you do about the cage match build happening natively in Japan? You had shows.
I don't know, because they're over there, and I'm not exactly in love with the build, so maybe going away would have helped.
Hey, yeah, but like the lineup, it was like you had a couple of new appearances. You had Yuki Yoshioka and Yoshiki Kato and Madoka Kakuta all making their rookie American performances throughout the week, and then the remainder of it, the overwhelming issue you had was you had 4 people from Gaja Dokuro, but you only had 1 or 2 from every other kind of stable, other than Love and Peace getting 2, but everything else you had 2 people from Paradox, you had 1 person from D Courage. You actually had 3 people from Paradox. I almost forgot about Susumu. But it was not like a group that it made a lot of sense from a card construction. And as we have studied all the Dragongate USA shows in its history, like that was an issue of the Gabe Sapolsky era Dragongate USA shows, having either like a weird combination of people at times, or making that it was kind of hard to book with what you had, and you kind of had to piece it kind of together. And that's kind of how that the Gatorson City card was.
And it's not always the end of the world. You know, we saw last year at the Pro Wrestling Revolution show on that Friday that you can make it work when it's Ben and Hyo, who weren't in the same unit at that time, and KZ and a trio together against what was Z-Brats. I mean, that worked out just fine for everybody involved. But this did sort of have that lack of cohesiveness that a 2012 or a 2013 Dragongate USA show would have had. I would like to know, and I guess I just now thought about this as I look at the roster page, but I would assume that Flamita's allowed to work in the United States, but Flamita wasn't booked, and I think having KZ and Flamita on these shows would have been really nice to see. I would like to see Strong Machine J in America at some point. I think Ryoya Tanaka would have been really exciting. If all of Love and Peace would have come over, I would have bought a plane ticket. I would have been in Vegas, and I still hold out hope that at some point Jason Lee will wrestle again in the United States. And then again, you're looking at Shun and Homare and maybe Luis Bonte, but I just think the lack of excitement towards the people that were brought over is less of a reflection on the actual people that were brought over and more of a reflection on, we are sitting here at the end of April, and this is one of the worst starts to a year that Dragongate has ever had. And so when we're not excited about the roster domestically and the things that most of these guys are involved with, especially that heel unit, because the difference is last year it was Shun and Minoru and Ishin coming over, And even with Minoru just sort of being along for the ride, is I think the polite way to say that, that was that was at the point in Z-Brats where their floor for a big trios match was 3.5 stars and the ceiling was 4.75. It was they had become such a well-oiled machine. That was one of the better heel units, or at least an era of a heel unit in the history of the promotion. And so that got brought over to the United States, and that worked out great. I obviously do not feel this way about the current heel unit. And so I think a lot of people, like, it was tough for me to get excited about these shows. And I do feel like unofficially people turn to me to maybe get them excited about things like this. And I didn't have a ton of cheer to offer because it was just Yoshioka, not Yoshioka and Tanaka. It was just KZ, not KZ and Strong Machine J or KZ and Flamita. The Paradox guys are great in theory. I find it a little odd that Dragongate continues to use them as the United States anchors and they don't use Ben and Hyo and then obviously Kame and Rita in more high profile spots. And then you have this heel unit that I just loathe. And so on paper, I think it was a rough go of things. I think I liked this Sin City show more than others did, at least others in the building. But
I liked it. It does not compare to Gate of Revolution, but I came away with enjoying it a good deal. Yeah.
Yes. So on the whole, I found it to be maybe at best a net neutral weekend. I certainly don't think it helped Dragongate USA's footing in America whatsoever. The wrestler that I was most impressed with this weekend is 50 years old, so that really doesn't do anybody any favors in the long term. And I don't think I would care if Dragongate came back to the States anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's going to depend on the roster, and not like they're in a situation that when you have these DG USA shows that naturally you're not going to send over 20 people, right? So you're going to need to fill out the roster with people, North Americans essentially, and they have, I think, a good stable in some places not, but it does not feel like that Dragongate USA necessarily has like the hottest indie names, and that seemed to kind of temper things a little bit. I mean, other than Gresham versus Yamato, Gresham is the biggest indie name kind of announced, and then unless you want to say Busta and the Brain because they're AEW kind of relationship with that, but I wonder if that has a little bit of considering like the indie kind of people that you were getting in 2009 through 2014. I wonder if there's a little bit of that also at play as well.
Possibly. I don't know if there's indie stars they could use. I mean, I really like the kids on the New Texas show, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but they're not stars. I mean, I don't think anybody would buy a ticket to a Dragongate USA show that was maybe on the fence because Danny O'Ryan was on that show or because Shimbashi was on the show, which is unfortunate because I think the Texas crew, the Texas indies continue to develop talent better in the United States than almost anybody else, but they're not over on that level. There's not the Davey Richards, or in a latter era, this is going to be a weird example to make, but there's not like a Matt Riddle level indie star at this point. There's nobody on the US indies where I'm like, God, I'd really like to see Yuki Yoshioka wrestle this guy. It just doesn't exist right now.
Yeah, and I will say that Yamato versus Jonathan Gresham is a sickos kind of dream match. And I think like that is the kind of stuff that I do like. And I think that when you compare that also with like Swan last year, it's a good kind of position for Yamato and booking, and also for like the indie star there as kind of as well. But I do think it is something where you look at the indies and you look at who they have, and it's their trusted hands who have worked in Japan, and your El Kakuis, your Marcus Mathers, Los Hermanos de Julia, and things like that. It just like maybe that's also just more of a kind of a temperature check on 2026, and in my kind of thinking.
Gate of Sin City, I mean, let's get into it because I want to talk about Golden Colosseum more than I want to talk about WrestleMania weekend stuff. As for the commentary, it was Joe Dombrowski who did the shows last year, and it was Larry Dallas. In full transparency, I sent both of them notes. I was more than happy to do so. I think Larry Dallas, I think publicly, whether he understands it or not, I think Larry Dallas brings a lot of baggage still. But the thing that I will always compliment him on, and the reason that I like him doing Dragongate shows, is that he does deeply care about Dragongate. And I think that gets over more than anything else. And that
Absolutely.
gets over in a way with him that it did kind of get over on the New Texas Pro Show, because I liked the presentation of that entire show, and I thought that entire team did such a great job with just making the Dragongate guys feel important, which I greatly appreciated. But when Larry calls a Dragongate show, it comes across like a big deal, and he has a reverence for those guys that Veda Scott does not have and that Joe Dombrowski does not have. And so from that aspect, I thought
it's
Larry
because he
did a great job.
knows the guys. He, by and large, and now we're kind of at like a time with at least Kato and Ishin being guys that were post-COVID. By and large, he has known these guys for 15, 16 years. And for people like Ben and Hio, he has known them since they have been trainees.
Yeah,
and that's irreplaceable, I would say.
I agree. From that aspect, I think he does a great job. Do I think this show needed Larry Dallas repeatedly mentioning that Ho Ho Loon stole his job? No, I do not. I found that to be odd and a little bit unprofessional, because I think the circumstances that sent Larry home were a global pandemic, and I think Dragongate shifted their business practices in a way that none of us could have ever imagined. And I found the repeated mentions of that to be quite odd and a little bit disappointing, quite frankly. But I will say this: Larry knows the wrestlers. He knows a lot of the moves. He knows how to pronounce their names. And while that is a low bar, that is a bar that some people calling Dragongate wrestling cannot clear. And so it was nice to have Larry Dallas back on the call again. The guy works very hard. He is many things, but a hard worker he absolutely is. And I thought Larry did a good job on the show. Dombrowski, I think, is out of his element. I think Dombrowski is a fantastic U.S. indie announcer. If I was going to watch an indie show that was taking place in the United States, I would want Dombrowski doing the play-by-play. I do, however, think he is out of his depth when it comes to Dragongate guys, and I don't feel like, nor did I expect, but I do not feel like he gained any knowledge from the Dragongate product from where he was at in April of 2025 to April of 2026.
Yeah, and I have to say that, like, given the fact that Dragongate has one of their biggest shows of the year in 5 days, the fact that essentially up until the main event there was no mention of Dragongate Network, it felt very kind of, to me, like detached from the promotion. And then when you had a moment that, and I'm not gonna double down on what you said, though I do agree the ho-ho stuff with Larry was unprofessional. And when you have like that happen, it cements that detachment, right? Because I mean, like facts being facts, ho-ho is the color commentator in Dragongate Japan. So like it just in a way, and this was something that like I kind of had a question about last year, and especially like this, like the cohesion of this as it relates to the mainline promotion. Sometimes I felt like it was lacking back then, and it continues to kind of lack. And I think that Joe Dombrowski and the way that he feels kind of out of the element, and at least in a way that I think that like it is not anything deeper than just familiarity. It does further cement that detachment when you compare that to the current Dragongate Japan English commentary crew. I mean, that's just the facts at hand here.
All right, let's rifle through this show. We're talking a lot about WrestleMania weekend. I thought it was bizarre that Mac and Kukui and Kai led off this show. I found that match to be a really poor choice of an opening match. I'm not sure why it was put in this position, even if I like Willie Mack and I thought El Kukui had a good night and it was nice seeing Kai in America. I thought this was a terrible choice to open the show.
Yeah, and like it was just kind of here, and I could see in theory the idea of, okay, you have it's 3 heavyweights and super heavyweights, but the size will deceive you. These are actually 3 guys who can work at a pretty fast pace. I can see that as an idea for a show opener in theory, but the pace was not just kind of all throughout of it. Kai Kai over WrestleMania weekends is always kind of funny to me. 2019, he only worked a House of Glory show wearing a Tribe Vanguard shirt, wanting to be anywhere else than here. And Kai, this was his only booking of the weekend, and he was just kind of vibing around other than that. And I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, no, this was just kind of there. Mac wins with a stunner on Kai. That was all fine. The Match 2 was La Estrella and Ho Ho Loon versus Reese Maddox and Channing Decker. Reese Maddox making his return from last year's show. He is the son of, I'm blanking on his name right now, Jason Ayers, the son of Jason Ayers, the former Dragongate USA referee. Ho Ho, most popular man in Vegas, wins with a Ho Ho roll on Maddox. So it was great to see Estrella. He was a lot of fun in this match, but it was just kind of there. And I mean, this is like, I get why they bring in Maddox, but like this having a better name and more, you know, someone maybe more experienced, I felt like would have been a better match.
Do you know Channing Decker worked Big Japan last year?
You know, that's a very Big Japan kind of thing.
I admittedly had not heard of Channing Decker. I knew nothing about him. He's 37 years old, which stunned me because he does not look it. He looks much younger than that.
Yeah.
And he spent time working Big Japan last year, which I thought was fascinating. This is an unfortunate ageist comment. I was way more interested in seeing more of Channing Decker before I found out that he was 37. I guess I can Men in Black erase that from my head. I thought he was a nice little worker, but I also thought he was 22. And when I found he was 37, I was like, oh, maybe not. I thought he was fine. Reese Maddox has such weak-looking strikes that I just can't take anything that he does seriously. It's a real hindrance on his performance.
He's put on some weight, but he needs to put on a lot more weight.
Yeah, I know. His strikes just look like they don't hurt anybody, which is a real problem. La Estrella was great, and this was a fine match.
Match 3, Susumu Yokosuka versus D Courage's assistant, or I guess now full-fledged member, Marcus Mathers. Marcus Mathers wins with the Broad Street Buster into a 450. I thought this was good and fun, but not necessarily great.
Okay, so this is where I think I have the more divergent opinion of anybody that watched this show.
I think Yamato versus Gresham is going to be my point of diversion, so that's fair.
I don't really like Gresham, so that I don't know. I'll say this: I thought this match was better than Yamato versus Gresham. Now, I find Gresham to be a cosplay wrestler, and I don't really like him. You know, I find the Zack Sabre Jr. Jonathan Gresham matches from Beyond to be one of the more overrated series of matches from the 2010s. I mean, there's people I know and I really respect their opinions that think those are pieces of art, and I certainly do not feel that way. I mean, I think Gresham's fine, but if I was booking a company, I mean, I would never push Gresham seriously. I would never put him in any sort of position that mattered. I would think maybe at best he'd be a fun tag team wrestler. Whereas not only do I think Mathers, I think he has such a higher ceiling, but I thought Yokosuka versus Mathers was great. Not a notebook match, I want to be clear, but really, really great for what it was. I thought it was Susumu in his element. I like when Susumu does leg matches like this. I like when he's able to hone in on that body part and really work it to death. And I thought Mathers did a great job of fighting through a lot of that pain and then still selling the leg in a way that I thought was believable and really engaging. And I really enjoyed this match. I thought this was maybe, although there were matches that Mathers had, like in Japan, that have been better. You know, the Twin Gate match that he had was a better match than this all told. This was the best Mathers performance that I've ever seen. I thought he was great in this match.
I thought that Susumu had a great technical performance and Mathers held up his end of the bargain.
I really like this version of Susumu. And again, I keep on going back to there's just some little things that Mathers did in this match where, you know, he'd throw a wild kick, but then after that kick would connect, he would sell it. He was doing early in the match, you know, after Susumu had sort of dedicated time to working the leg over the first time around, Mathers was doing these sort of one-legged chops to show that his knee was hurt, but that he was still trying to throw these chops with all of his. But I thought that was such a clever thing that he did. I thought those looked really good. It was Susumu in his element, but I really thought Mathers was right there with him for a lot of the match. I was really impressed with this.
The move that Susumu did that really got me was his figure four that he was readjusting, and then was the way that he was fighting it his way through it. Little did I know how much a figure four would be used later on in the show, but I did kind of enjoy that. Mather's eating two jumbo no kachis going into the closing stretch. I was like, at a moment, I was like, okay, so we're going to get the Yokosuka Hunter big cutter, and then we're going to move on because Susumu has, the Twin Gate match coming up. And nope, no, that's not the case. I was 3.25 on it. I enjoyed it a good deal. It just, for me, maybe it just didn't resonate at the level it did for you.
I'm higher on this than everybody else, and I think that maybe changes my opinion on this show. But I really enjoyed this. I thought this was a really strong effort from both men.
Next up, we had Ben and Hyo of Love and Peace versus Los Hermanos de la Julia, Arrow Panther and Fight Panther Jr. versus the Busta and the Brain versus the Steps that try to take out Alex Price. As he walked down to the ring, the stairs fell out of place, and he really fucked up the back of his leg, and it was really favoring it to the start, and throughout the match was very kind of touchy. We see later on in the weekend that he was okay, but he had like a giant ass welt there with a 3-way tag. The closing stretch was Love and Peace getting the Panther brothers by themselves, in particular Arrow Panther, getting him with the roll through stunner, Benkei spear, and then Hyo hitting the hunting from the second rope for the win here. And then Ben and Hyo ran around a lot. And the thing that this match really reminded me, Case, was how great Ben and Hyo are as a tag team, how much of a bummer it is that we haven't had them versus Jackie Rita yet for the Twin Gate.
Oh, there's a lot of bummers happening with the Twin Gate division right now. That's just one of the many atrocities happening there. But I agree with you. I mean, it was 1 year ago in Vegas when they worked another 3-way tag like this, where you and I were both like, oh, Ben and Hyo as a team, that kind of works really nicely. I mean, it didn't work out logistically for a few different people, but I was pitching very hard to people that asked me that were running shows in Vegas this year. What I really wanted was Ben and Hyo and Yoshioka in a trios main event against the heel unit. I thought it would have been cool to do a class of 2016 thing there, because I know that Ben and Hyo have great chemistry, and I thought Yoshioka would have fit right in with them. Instead, we get another tag match, another 3-way tag match that Ben and Hyo are involved with. I have to give a few compliments here. The tagline of one is a genius and the other is insane is a fantastic tag. That is awesome. Good on you guys, Alec Price and Jordan Oliver. The thing that I was thinking about as I was watching them in this match is, I really like Jordan Oliver. There was a point in time in which Brett Lauderdale was using him like Luthez, and I thought Oliver got greatly exposed, and it did his career a giant disservice. But I have always been bullish on Oliver. I think he's really talented. I like he and Price as a tag team quite a bit. They are right at the threshold in terms of look and talent and presentation of, would I like to see this team do a Dragongate tour? And I'm just not sure if I want to see that or not. But I thought for the environment that they worked in, I thought Price and Oliver did a great job here. The other thing that I have to note is, you and I remember talking about this with Rich Craich on the audio we did that's on the flagship Patreon from last year as well. Leaving the Pro Wrestling Revolution show last year after the Panther Brothers and Lucha Solos, we all made the point that if that match had happened 10 years ago, that would become the touring match on the U.S. Indies in the same way that Pentagon versus Phoenix did, in the same way that Osprey versus Skrull did. That would be the match of the year that every indie would be frothing at the mouth to book. And we all made the point like, oh, we're not really sure if the ecosystem works like that. Like 10 years ago, AEW in Chicago would have done everything they could to get that match, but it doesn't really feel like people are watching in the same way they did. Maybe the financials just aren't worth the risk at this point. And so that match ended up not happening anywhere else. And because it didn't happen anywhere else, it went out of sight, out of mind. And then I watched the Panthers come out on this show, and I know this house wasn't great for Dragongate USA. By all accounts, seemingly it was a disappointment internally. They should have booked Panther Brothers versus Lucha Solos in the rematch. They should have just done that match again. I think that would have been a huge hit here.
Yeah, you take them out. You could have done Love and Peace versus Busta and the Brain, by
Or you
themselves.
could have done Love and Peace and Yoshioka against Bust in the Brain and Mathers, and then move Yokosuka into a main event with Yamato and Dragon Kid, and maybe we do KZ versus Gresham instead. There were things to do, but I know Solos were booked on that Martinez show that ended up not happening, or even if they weren't, get them to Vegas. They should have just done that match again.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on it. And the wild thing was like I felt like other than Ben and Hio should be getting more tag work. Like my other big takeaway was this was a Panther Brothers showcase. Like this was the kind of match that we got kind of spoiled by in the Lucha Solos, and then we saw them get in their tour, just the way that they in a certain kind of way fit in with like their style of indie lucha with the overall kind of Dragongate house style. And I thought this was a 3 3/4 match. I thought this was a whole lot of fun. Like at this point I was like going, is this just Dragongate bias, which is fair. I always try to make that stuff clear, right? Or am I having a good time? And I was like, I am having a good time at this point. And that followed up with a match that I went 4 stars on, that I could tell that Case is groaning in inside hearing. Jonathan Gresham versus Yamato, a kind of technical dream match. Yamato wins with a reverse figure 4. I love this kind of style of Yamato wrestling, and I get what you said before about Jonathan Gresham. I do feel like he is in some ways a cringe kind of figure with this, but I felt like the way that him and Yamato worked, and this kind of became this knee work match, I thought that it played into like Yamato's kind of strengths here, and like the way that Gresham kind of fit in for that. I thought that this was a fun little technical delight here. And now, Case, I gave you the floor to bury it.
No, I don't feel like it was that bad. I mean, I don't want to be misinterpreted. I do want to back up just one second and note the Panther Brothers might be the most talented wrestlers in the world that are not working for a major league promotion right now, and it is wild. It was kind of shocking how good they were in that 3-way tag, and it made me want them back in Japan with Flamita immediately. But I mean, I don't even feel like they make tape a lot working DTU, so I can't follow them as much as I'd like to.
So when you were talking about Flamita not getting booked, I pulled up because Cage Match is not working right now. I pulled up the Lucha Blogs Cubs fans database, and they team with like Flamita a lot in DTU over 2026. That's the wild thing. Like Flamita is working a pretty, he hasn't worked in April, but he is working a somewhat clip in Mexico still.
Yeah, I can't believe they're not somewhere else right now. Again, I'd have to think a little bit more about it. But if your major league promotions are AEW, WWE, CMLL, AAA, All Japan, New Japan, Noah, Dragongate, and I'll give you DDT as well, at least and then the Joshi companies are its own little thing. But the Panthers are probably the best guys not working full time in one of those companies. I think they're fantastic. So good on them. I wish they would have been booked more this weekend, but they're good, and so they didn't get booked anywhere else. As for Yamato versus Gresham, I mean, look, I didn't hate the match, and I don't like cringe is not how I would define Gresham. I wrote in my notes, this match was smart but boring. I don't connect to Gresham as a wrestler at all. I don't get it. I've never really got it. I think there's better versions of him out there. I'm just largely unenthused when I see his name on paper. But again, this match wasn't bad. It was just, I thought Mathers versus Yokosuka was really engaging, and I thought this match was maybe even technically better, but I didn't care about it because there's just a very hard ceiling with Gresham matches that he very rarely breaks through. And when he does, those matches are fantastic, but I don't know. I've never connected to the guy as a wrestler.
No, that's all entirely fair, and I feel like that he is someone that sometimes connects with me and sometimes doesn't. I do like that they did kind of do the work on commentary getting over. Like Gresham really was a big Dragon Gate fan, and it just never worked out for him for Dragon Gate USA at that time. And I thought that that was kind of a nice little subtext. And I'm not aware of this being any sort of a tryout or anything like that, but like having at least a level of like that kind of overtone added a little bit of depth to it.
It was fine. I found Yokosuka versus Mathers to be a bit of a more engaging match, but that I seem to be on an island there.
Main event was the This Is Dragon Gate 6-man tag. Gaja Dokuro, Madoka Kakuta, Ishin, and Yoshiki Kato versus the combined army of Dragon Kid, KZ, and Yuki Yoshioka. KZ gets the win after an impact with an impact after an elbow smash and a battle hook on Ishin. What were your thoughts on this case? I'm just going to throw it to you first before my.
I thought it was a low end notebook match. I thought Larry Dallas had a great line as this match really started to get going towards the finishing stretch.
The Masters line.
Yeah, I wrote that down in my notes. I thought that was great that, this match really started to pick up, and Larry said, as everybody knows, the Masters doesn't start until the back nine. I had never really heard a Dragon Gate 6-man tag described like that before, and I thought he sort of knocked it out of the park with that line. And it just, I'll steal that going forward. I thought that was really clever. I thought KZ was great. I thought Ishin was great. I don't think anybody left Vegas, whether they were familiar with Yoshioka or Kakuta or not, going, God, I need to see those guys again, especially Kakuta. I mean, Yoshioka at least had some big spots down the stretch with Ishin, but this was sort of the Ishin KZ showcase, as are most big matches these guys are involved with. And Dragon Kid was great. More on Dragon Kid later, but I don't know. Your Dreamgate champion was sort of the sixth most entertaining guy in a match of six guys, and that in a spot like this is gravely concerning to me.
Yeah, and like I think at this point you also have to have the conversation about the opportunity costs. Having Kakuta in this and Kakuta and Kato in this meant that everything in Hakata building towards the cage match had to be about Kota Minoura versus Amare. By booking and sending them there, that's what you had to do on your native shows. And I don't think that was a good opportunity cost.
I don't know, because I've hated everything Kakuta's done in Japan. So I don't know if it makes a difference. I mean, I'm honestly, I'm a little bit more intrigued by the Homare Minoura stuff than I would be anything that Kakuta's doing, or, more bad Kakuta Shun stuff. I don't really care about that. So that didn't bother me whatsoever. And it speaks to a larger problem that sending your Dreamgate champion to America is maybe looked at as an unwise move, because that just shouldn't be the case. Your champion, no matter who it is, should be put in a position like this where people go, wow, I have to see more of that guy. He's the Dreamgate champion. Okay, well, Dragon Gate's in pretty good hands, and with Kakuta, we've just seen that hasn't happened.
Last year with Yamato having the belt and having that match against
Swan.
Against Swan, my wife, who the smallest bit of wrestling fan ever. The only thing she cared about WrestleMania weekend when I was doing everything case was Hio's outfit for it. And then I told her it was formal wear, when in the back of my mind I was like, he's wearing Z-Brat's gear on Dragon Gate USA show. That's not great. But like but her takeaway seeing Yamato with the belt after the match was like, okay, I get he is the guy at like that point. Kakuta, I don't think she would have that kind of takeaway seeing him in this match. You would think like, oh, he must be the champion because he's big. Like that would be her kind of takeaway. And I don't know if that's that's a bigger question about the booking of the Dreamgate title. I mean, that's a conversation we've been having for 5 months at this point.
Yeah, I just think Kakuta's completely failed in this role, which is a bummer, because I think he's a guy who's a great second option, but I think he's just continuing to fail as this option one sort of guy. And this was another environment in which, again, I thought Ishin was great. I thought Kato was very good. I'm bummed Kato didn't get booked more, but then again, nobody knows who he is, so I understand why he didn't. And then Dragon Kid and KZ just continue to hold their own, and Dragon Kid continues to build up this incredible lineage of matches on North American soil, and this was no different. And again, I would go 4 flat on this. I thought they worked really hard. I thought they got there in the end. And I thought that Larry Dallas back 9 comment was great, because I thought that really accurately described how this match felt.
Yep, I was 4 flat on it. And I mean that I had 3 matches right at 3.25 to 4 stars on that. And at least for me, it's not what we got last year at DG USA shows, and it certainly is not 2009 through like 2011 Dragon Gate USA shows. But if in Dragon Gate USA Rewind and Watch history case, if they gave us the gate of Sin City in 2012, 2013, or 2014, I would think that this was the best show that they had in a couple of years. So in general, I'm kind of positive about the gate of Sin City on an island, just the show itself. But like you, as we said, the other WrestleMania entanglements kind of take you, kind of have you walk away a little bit scratching your head.
Yeah, I'm not quite that high on it. I mean, it reminded me a little bit of the first time they did that triple shot in Florida, where it was Heat, and then it was Open the Ultimate Gate, and then it was Mercury Rising, and this felt like that Heat show, which was the show that Uhaa Nation blew out his knee on. It was just like, all right, if this was setting the table for the rest of the weekend, I'd be game with this. I'd be okay with this. But unfortunately for some guys, this was really the only time that we saw them. And I don't really feel like this built off of anything. I don't think Dragongate made any new fans. I don't think they won over any lapsed fans. I think this was a good show that happened and people moved on very quickly. And, that's just all there is to it. And when the stakes are what they are for a Japanese company coming over to America, I think you have to have better shows than that. And this was sort of a lame duck DG USA show that, again, on paper was fine. I mean, I had one match at 4 stars, one match at 3 3/4, 2 at 3.5. In theory, that's a good show, but that's not really what I'm looking for once a year out of Dragongate USA. I need the floor to be a little bit higher.
Yeah, no, I totally understand where you're coming from. And, if my star ratings ended up like that, I think that would be my takeaway too. Other Mania weekend takeaways before we get into Golden Colosseum.
Yeah, let me rifle through a few thoughts here. The WrestleCon tag, which I'm going to pull up that lineup here real quick.
I have everything pulled up. It's Ben and Hyo versus Toxin and Latigo versus Close Personal Friends versus Starman and Starboy Charlie.
Okay, so MLJ did the ring announcing for this. He looked like fucking shit, like he always does. I continue to think he's the least talented person involved in all of professional wrestling. I think Jim Smallman is going to go to hell for a lot of different things, but on that list is encouraging or at least allowing ring announcers to look like fucking shit when they're doing ring announcing, because I always attribute him with that and that era of progress with Smallman thinking it was okay to do that, and a bunch of people have since followed suit, ML being the worst offender. Of course, he said Hyo's name wrong, which was a reoccurring trend throughout the weekend. It is the easiest name out of anybody's to pronounce. It is exactly how it looks. I don't understand how people continue to struggle with that, but of course he did, because that is just what he always does. Veda Scott on commentary called Joe Dombrowski our resident Dragongate expert, which made me laugh. You're welcome for the notes, Joe. Glad I could get you through this weekend. And then at one point in this match, there was a Starman chant, which, of course, Latigo and Toxin and Ben and Hyo did not get at any point during this match. That did make me want to kill myself, and I do feel like that is a sign that maybe Dragongate shouldn't be hitching their wagon to... I mean, this was WrestleCon, which was a bummer. Normally, I would just say this at the Game Changer stuff, but this was WrestleCon, and Starman still got the only specified chant in this match, which was absolutely devastating.
You do know who he is, right?
Oh, I'm intimately familiar with another person that I find to be completely talentless.
Yeah. It's the same crossover at play here.
God, that guy fucking sucks too. I thought Lando was very interesting. I thought Latigo and Toxin and Ben and Hyo were really fun together. Danny Black is a guy that I like. I thought he looked a step slow in this match. And, again, we had to deal with some Starman bullshit, which I can't fucking handle. As for the New Japan Death Vegas show, I've always found El Desperado to be slightly overrated, and after booking Ishin and Effie in the same match, I now have nothing nice to say about that man. Effie was horrific. Ishin held his own. It was fine for what it was. Kushida and Yamato versus MXM versus Bust in the Brain. I liked this a lot. It made me wish that there was a universe in which Kushida and Yamato could team more. I thought they were very interesting with one another.
You know what it made me do, and what I did basically for the weekend afterwards, it made me book up Fire Pro World and then start getting back into it, because I was like, Mason Madden versus Yamato is very much a Fire Pro random thing that I ended up really enjoying for like that. Just like Yamato, whenever he gets a ham it up with like things like this, it usually plays off. It's a shame that Triller broke and you
Did
didn't
not
see
see
the
the
finish of the
finish.
match.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like MXM in every environment but AEW. I thought
Yeah.
I thought their CMLL stuff was really fun. I liked them in this match. That is an act
They
that
were
I have.
very funny and great.
Yeah, they were. You're right. That is just an act that for whatever reason I don't think works at all in AEW, but I really like it in CMLL, and I like it everywhere else.
You know what it is? It's a great gimmick that in its heart is a territory gimmick that does not work on national television, but it works in any other concept of pro wrestling, but it does not work on mainstream US weekly television, in my opinion.
Then there was El Phantasmo and
Micah
versus Dragon Kid and Starlight Kid. Hot take, I thought one of the best things I saw this entire weekend. This, to me, felt like a proper WrestleMania weekend match. It felt special. It felt like a thing that you could only see on this weekend, and I thought everybody worked exceptionally hard. The Dragon Kid Starlight Kid team is really fun, and I almost went notebook on this. I went 3 3/4. I really liked this match.
Yeah, it was a lot of good fun. I had explained to Kingsley that Dragon Kid, the fact that like Dragon Kid like inspiring and like was like teaming with like that girl that we saw on that one show, and I was like, that she probably spent like close to $1,000 on this mask and mask cover for the show alone. Like, and that just was like that level of dedication that like the two of them kind of have as a team is really kind of fun to see. I like the fact that it was supposed to be Maki Ito, and Maki Ito didn't get a work visa or whatever the situation was with all the Stardom girls not having that situation. So it was Micah, but LP was still doing Maki Ito spots. I enjoyed that. I thought this was a match that should have been on the WrestleCon Super Show, because spiritually it was that kind of match. In the best kind of way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll pause on New Texas Pro for a second. The GCW World on Lucha show was Arez, Gringo Loco, and Vengador versus Hyo Casey and Yoshioka. I thought the Gringo Loco team had an excellent look, and they used
their gear.
They used a color palette that Dragongate has never used, and I hope that somebody was there taking notes that they should have.
Buddy, someone has used it. It was the over generation color palette, man.
Oh, kind of, but yes, kind of. I see what you're saying, but I'm going to slightly disagree there. I thought
that's fair.
I thought Arez and Yoshioka were awesome together. This was a really fun match. A little bit too long, whereas I thought the New Texas Pro 6-man was delightfully short and actually could have gone on a little bit longer. I thought this slightly overstayed its welcome, but the bulk of the work here was really, really good. And it was nice to see Arez look as good as he did, especially against Yoshioka. I watched the Mystery Wrestling stream for just a second. Somebody pinged me when Dragon Kid, Casey, and Yamato were on, and I was just immediately put off by what I saw, and so I closed it. Mike Bailey, I love you as a wrestler. Evil Uno, I like you as a wrestler. I do not need to be involved with whatever you guys are doing here. And then that brought us to the New Texas Pro Show. I have to give a huge shout out to Dan Miller and Cameron Hawkins. I thought they were stellar on commentary. I only watched the Dragongate stuff from this show. I'm going to go back and watch the other stuff that looked good on paper. There's a Brian Keith match that I want to check out. The Dragon Kid 6-man tag, I thought was so much fun. For starters, it's the best I've ever seen Starboy Charlie look, and I like him, but I thought this was maybe his best individual performance ever. I really like Epidemius Jr. I've been a big advocate for him. I know he wrestled Shun Skywalker in Texas a few years ago. He's the type of guy that I would like to see if Dragongate was going to be more open to foreign wrestlers coming to Japan. I think he would be a great pick. I think Shimbashi had a stellar evening, and I know I'm not the only one that felt that way. I think Shimbashi would be another guy that I would really like to see develop in Dragongate. But this was put together, essentially as a tribute to Dragon Kid. I mean, it was a vanity 6-man tag just because New Texas Pro had the option of booking Dragon Kid, and they jumped at the opportunity, and they did. I thought this whole thing, especially, after having to watch MLJ ring announce and having to listen to Veda Scott shriek. I don't know what happened to Veda. I thought she used to be a good commentator, but not anymore. And, again, just hearing Dombrowski be out of his depth time after time. I thought the New Texas Pro Show offered such a classy, professional presentation. Nobody was yelling at me. The commentators were entertaining. The commentators knew their stuff, and I provided notes to them as well. But I thought they did a great job of not just reading what was on paper, but taking some notes, then adding their own flavor to the match. And all this match only went 10 minutes. I would like to see what this match would have looked like at 15 or 16, because I think it could have been really great at that point. But for what it was, this was like a really fun TV style 6-man tag that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and you said earlier that like the Texas indie scene has really gotten to this point, and that like it is such a developer of talent, and Daniel Ryan is someone that I have gotten to see around DFW whenever there's like DFW wrestling shows, whenever like the Houston wrestlers kind of make it up for it. Like I've talked about before about how Texas, and I know Lanza does too, like it's very segmented, but it's segmented in a way that like you can work in a lot of different places, and if you're willing to drive for it. I mean, that's kind of the issue, that like DFW to Houston is 5 hours, so it's just like the state of the state makes those kinds of things difficult. But if you have that kind of drive, then it picks up for it. So I was really interested in seeing the show, just also from like the extent that I like seeing how Texas wrestling kind of is. Like that was one of the fun things about seeing that Texas Wrestling Cartel show last year with UK's was in a way kind of getting the pulse on like a scene in that sort of way. But like in the 6-man match, like it was all basically devoted to Dragon Kid. I thought that Cass and Shimbashi were great kind of tag team partners working with him for it, and Orion and Epidemus Jr. were just really solid foils. Starboy Charlie is like how you are with some wrestlers. Starboy Charlie is kind of go away with me, but I thought that he was a net neutral, if not a positive in this. But it was a great kind of thing. Dragon Kid gets the win with the Bible on it, a fun 6-man tag, and then they had Dmitry Alexandrov versus Ishin as a singles match on the show. And given kind of like the ring thing with it, I thought this was a really kind of cool, fun match, kind of playing on the territory style in a lot of ways, especially with kind of the role that Dimitri has within New Texas and at least the deathmatch side of the Texas wrestling scene.
Yeah, this was, I think, one of our big revelations last year was that Ishin was capable of sort of doing the territory doi stuff from Dragongate USA, where you could put him in an environment where all of a sudden he looked like he belonged in Continental or Southwest, and was really enjoyable in that role. And so this felt like a playoff of that, where, you know, this match wasn't anything overly complicated. Ishin certainly did more moves with a Z in the 6-man tags that he was working this weekend. But again, a stellar Ishin performance, and he continues to be the shining star when Dragongate comes to America. I mean, other than Shun, I don't think anybody has benefited more from making these trips to the States. And as we leave this weekend, it's a little concerning to be given that Yoshioka was there and Kikuta was there and Kato was there, even if not booked often, that again, the MVP of the weekend to me was Dragon Kid, with Ishin in a very close second place.
Just for a point of clarification, especially because the kind of episode it was Cosmo Orion in the 6-man tag. Danny Orion was in the main event of the show. So different Orion. I've just wanted to make sure we clarified that before moving on.
That's enough WrestleMania weekend. I talked about that far more than I had anticipated. Look, I don't think Dragongate is putting their best foot forward. I think the talent that was on that Sin City card was fine. I just would have laid out that card in a different way, and I spent some time on Saturday doing that, and I don't want to get into the fantasy booking aspect of it all, but I think there's a way better version of that show that we did not get to see, which speaks to, I think, the larger problem that Dragongate is having in 2026 is that it's not like the roster got worse. I mean, Daya leaving is a giant hit. It's not that the roster got worse. It's just that the booking is so uninspired right now, and they're bringing out the worst in a lot of these guys, and I feel that very heavily as we get into Golden Colosseum.
Yeah, let's get into this. The show will be on the 26th from the Aichi Budokan in Aichi, Nagoya, Japan. 1500 local time start. That's 2 a.m. on the East Coast. That would be a 10 p.m. start on the West, 6 Greenwich Mean Time. And we finally come to it. It's the loser unit disbands Mascara contra Caballera 6-way steel cage match. Shun Skywalker versus Homare versus El Cielo versus Madoka Kakuta versus Kota Minoura versus Yoshiki Kato, with the added stipulation that the loser of the match will lose their mask or hair. Their unit will disband, and if it's Kakuta losing, it will be a Big Boss Shimizu as a hostage, losing his hair instead of Kakuta. And it's a real mess of a cage match main event where I spent some serious time yesterday on jury duty case. I actually brought a notepad in the jury room, like during all the downtime, trying to write out, like, okay, what are the scenarios that kind of would lend to this person being the loser of this match? Because, I mean, essentially, there is a loser of the match, and then how this would build off into really Kobe World Season in the next 2 months. And I have to say, I got nothing out of the exercise case, and I'm just as confused as I was last time we talked about the dead, that I almost called it Dead or Alive. That's one for the show. The Golden Colosseum 6-way cage match. I don't know if I feel strongly any way about who's going to lose this match. I do you have any sort of anchoring in this, or any sort of lead I can kind of grasp onto? Because I'm really almost at a loss of words trying to figure out who will be the loser and what is the situation going forward. Other than I just don't think Gaja Dokuro is going to lose. That's like the only aspect that I have a strong feeling about.
I started breaking it down by probability because as I've said for months now, I have no feel for the direction that this is going to go. And I feel like over the last 11 years, this might be the Dragongate main event on a big show that I have the least amount of feel for, and to some degree, the least amount of intrigue for. Like, I kind of just want to get through this and see where the snow globe shakes out and go from there. But I know in order to get to that point, we have to get through this. So I broke it down this way, in that because Shimizu is going to be out the rest of the year, I don't think it does anybody any favors for him to be involved in that finish. So I think Kakuta is going to be the first one to leave the cage. I think he's the least important guy in this story. I think Shimizu is a non-factor here because they're not going to be able to do anything with him for the immediate future. So I think Kakuta is going to get out of the cage first.
And frankly, Shimizu might not be able to move around enough with the cage that getting him involved, seeing how he was at the beginning of the month. Like, he's really physically limited at this point. So I'm entirely with you. Like, Kakuta taking flag 1 makes all the sense in the world to me.
So I feel pretty confident about that. And then I think Shun will follow. I know everybody always wants to do the charade of Shun Skywalker losing his mask. It's not happening now. I don't think it's happening ever. But certainly not in April of 2026. That would be possibly the single worst booking decision this company could ever make if they decide to do that. I don't really entertain it. I don't want to discuss it any further. I think Shun will be out after that. So that'll leave you with the guys that are truly at risk, which is Cielo, Kato, Minoura, and Homare. I don't feel like Kato and Cielo are big enough stars to close this match out themselves. I think they will have a lot of focus in the middle of the match. I think this will probably turn into basically Kato versus Cielo at some point, where they'll do their big sequences. Cielo will probably be nearing escape. He'll get thrown back in the cage. Kato will get out, and then Cielo will quickly follow. I don't see any way this match ends with a final 2 other than Minoura and Homare, because as you've said, they've been the primary focus with this sort of B story of Ishin and Minoura brewing. And so I feel like it makes sense with all of that it's left with those 2 guys in the cage. And then, I sort of had to think about, not only what do I think will happen, but what do I want? I do get the feeling that Minoura is going to escape. Homare is going to lose his hair. We'll lose Saipatra. And then I also think that there's a very strong chance that Gaja Dokuro turns on Minoura after the match. I feel like we're setting up Kakuta versus Minoura for the June Korakuen in a Dreamgate match there. And then whether they do Kakuta versus Tanaka or Kakuta versus Yoshioka or whatever the fuck, Kakuta versus somebody else at Kobe World, they can do that, but I think we have to get through Kakuta versus Minoura first. And I've sort of landed on feeling pretty confident about that. Kakuta, Shun, Kato, Cielo, Minoura in that order. Saipatra disbands, Hamare gets his head shaved, but Minoura leaves Gaja Dokuro, and they set up Kakuta versus Minoura for June.
And I think that the more I thought about it, Hamare kind of seemed like the obvious loser. Like, he is at that point where get his head shaved. He needs to get away from Shun at this point. So this, at least for
I don't
him
know
to
if he
kind of,
does. I still think those guys are going to be attached at the hip, and I'm okay with that. Like I said 2 weeks
how
ago.
how do they remain attached to the hip if Hamare, who is the person who volunteered the unit into this match and this kind of stake, loses Saipatra for him with everything that Shun Skywalker has been?
I think that's an entirely fair question. I think it's still very much a position where Shun is the leader in that. It's not a 1A, 1B. Hamare is to some degree still Shun's lackey, and I think Shun can take that out on him, but they can remain a team going forward. I would hate to see them broken up so quickly, because I do feel like there's so much more for them to do as a team at this point. Now, maybe just in resetting the deck with no Saipatra, with whatever comes of D-Courage, and they'll probably blow up Love and Peace just because they hate me. Maybe that's the way to do it, is you just have to get Shun and Hamare far away from each other. But I don't anticipate that at this point in time. I still think they're going to be together for a while.
I think that this is the time for them to kind of get Hamare into his own identity. And I think losing the hair kind of makes that a bit of a story in a way that can be like his next step story. And to me, that seems like the most obvious kind of story. I know that last time we were talking about it, I was like, is it going to be, are we looking at a Kota Minoura Dreamgate kind of thing? And obviously that seems to be happening. I don't think it's going to be a Kobe World kind of situation. It does kind of feel like to me that he is the one that they're going to kind of do for the heel turn. The one thing that I do kind of wonder, and it doesn't really mean anything, we've seen the promotion be totally fine with this sort of thing. They just got that Gaja Dokuro banner and kicking someone out of Gaja Dokuro right now when you have them on the banner less than a month and when you had it does kind of feel like a Dragongate kind of thing. But also look at Dragon Dia being all over these banners still at this point too. So I could see this. I think you've made me kind of come around. Like I was at the end of my exercise leaning more towards Hamare, maybe other than the idea of like maybe Cielo is at this point where you're ready to kind of see what he is, but then you go, is it really a thing? Is TN Revolution really a thing in the greater scheme of things? The answer is kind of no, so you shouldn't unmask him, and it kind of makes it a kind of a clear-cut choice to me.
I think the intrigue there is with Minoura and Hamare. The thing that somebody made this point to me 2 weeks ago that I've been saving for this preview, which is that no matter which unit disbands coming out of this match, whether it's Gaja Dokuro or whether it's Saipatra, we're now looking at a point in time where in succession, High End was a failure, Big Hug was a failure, and now whichever unit disbands, one or both of them, I think we'll chalk these units up to being failures as well. And that's a pretty astonishing hit rate, really since 2022, to just have these dead weight units. I mean, Big Hug never got out of the gate. That was their problem. I wanted the company to do way more with them than what they actually did. And they, I don't really understand the booking of that unit by any means, whereas High End did feel like dead weight, and both of these units, when they're wrestling each other, do feel like dead weight, which is a very strange thing. But I think historically, I mean, these are some all-time duds that have been piling up, which is interesting because it's in the same era as some great Zebrat stuff and some great D-Courage stuff and some great Vibe stuff. And, I have more to say on Big Hug here in a minute, but this is a reflection point where they, as a company, they've had some duds recently, and they've had more duds historically recently than at any other point in the company's history. And whether it's Saipatra or Gaja Dokuro going away, I think either would fall into that category.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that kind of makes me take Gaja Dokuro off the board is the whole heels have only lost to disbands matches. And I do think that there is kind of a disparity between at least how the fan base views Gaja Dokuro in Japan and at least the international response. And I think that is kind of a thing at play here too.
I don't know. Gaja Dokuro Dreamgate match just drew 1,100 fans to Corkin, and I know ticket sales for this show are seemingly doing okay, but I don't get the impression that Gaja Dokuro without Shimizu is some hot act in Japan either. I'm struggling to find the evidence there.
I mean, I would say that no one's a strong act, but there is. I mean, they sold a double sold out produce show off of Gaja Dokuro.
That's a small venue though. I mean, Z-Brats did the same thing, and Z-Brats felt much healthier than where Gaja Dokuro was at when they did their produce show.
That's fair. That's fair. So my main event, the Open the Twin Gate So Rio double championship match. Love and Peace, Jackie Rita, you Open the Twin Gate champions versus the original Jimmys from Paradox, Asumi Yokosuka and Kagatora, the So Rio tag team champions. We have a weird situation in the tag team division. Case, you remember like a month ago where I was when this match was made, and I was starting to wonder if there is a way that we can get as someone being a triple champion. It does kind of feel like that we're moving it into that being a possibility now, closing in on Golden Colosseum, at least to me.
Well, thank God. And this is a cruel thing to say, but thank God BB Hulk got injured, and so Horiguchi had to slide into the opening match, because Jay pointed out on Blue Sky that he thought they were going to add Horiguchi and Kanda into this match and make it a three-way tag for all the belts. And had they done that, I would have had a full-on mental breakdown, and that would have been one of the toughest. I mean, in the 11 years I've covered Dragongate, that might have been the thing that actually made me question whether or not I want to keep doing this.
And like that would have been the widest divergence that we would have ever had of an opinion, because I've been like, hell yeah, let's make Jackie Rita 3 crown champions, and you're just dreading just.
But I don't think they're going to be double crown champions. I think the most 2026 Dragongate thing to happen is that fucking Kagatora and Susumu are going to win this match. Since defeating Daya and Mathers in February, Kame and Rita are 1-6 in TV matches, with 5 of those losses coming to Paradox in some form or fashion. Their only win was against Paradox and Kobe Sambo Hall, which set up this match. They've had the belt since November. They've had 2 weird defenses. It was Monte and Demus and Daya and Mathers, and somehow Mathers is like the most full-time Dragongate guy out of that bunch, and then I guess Monte, but Daya nowhere to be found, Demus nowhere to be found. I am now in a position where I fully think Susumu and Kagatora are winning this match, because I just think that's 2026 Dragongate. I don't think they know what they have with Love and Peace. I find the booking of this unit to be utterly bizarre. I mean it in all sincerity when I say I think this is one of the best units on paper this company's ever assembled. And as you continue to struggle to draw houses anywhere, I would just put my foot on the throttle with this unit. Have them win, have the main event, have Kame and Rita be 2 of the, 10 best wrestlers in the world, and they don't seem to want to do it. I mean, I think this match will be incredible, but I think this match ends with a Yokosuka cutter. I'm fully of the belief that Susumu and Kagatora are winning this match, and if not, then I think it's setting up Kame and Rita versus Dragon Kid and Yamato in June at one of those Corkin shows, and I'm sure Paradox will win that one. But I have no faith that this is some long-term Kame Rita Twin Gate reign, even though it should be.
Yeah, now that you've said that, that's put the thought in my head that maybe the end game for this whole All Asia situation is Yamakid. And
or Susumu and Kagatora, because you could very easily do those guys against Genki and Kanda in like a Jimmy's Explode style of match. But I got news for you. Kame and Rita aren't going to be the All Asia Tag Team Champions. It's not going to happen. They might. The Ryukyu Dragon Pro belts seem like a stretch. They're not holding titles in All Japan Pro Wrestling.
I'm holding on to this dream that they have belts that the weight of they keep collecting tag team belts, and eventually they have more belts than their combined weight. I'm just having a little dream here, because you're right. It is probably going to be the original Jimmy's walking out of here, and then they're probably going to be the triple champions at this rate, and not the what should be the only answer to who is the other great tag team in the world right now, other than Knockout Brothers. Like it's going to be a real bummer that this is going to kind of be the end of their reign, when it really felt like at one point that this company was going to just take them off, to take their foot off the brakes and let them go full force as a tag team. And instead, it feels like it's petering out in this manner.
I think the booking of this team has been atrocious. I think this title reign has been a complete waste of time. I think it's insane that they haven't been positioned, Kame and Rita haven't been positioned as Korakuen level headliners at the very least. I don't understand what they're doing. And if this match were taking place in 2024 or 2025, I think there's a very strong argument that Kame and Rita would retain these titles, but it's 2026, and I think Dragon Gate is booking like a scared, cowardly promotion right now. I think they're turning back the clock in ways that they don't have to. And I think one of the victims are going to be this Kame and Rita tag team. And I think Susumu and Kagetora are going to have a very safe Twin Gate reign. I'm sure it will be, probably Ishin and Jason or Ishin and Kato versus Susumu and Kagetora World. We'll have a clusterfuck style of Twin Gate match with all this interference. Ishin and Kato win the Twin Gate belts, and we'll go from there because time is a flat circle. But I have no faith in it. I mean, they've had the belts for 6 months now, and they've defended the belts against Demus and Monte and Daya and Mathers. This isn't the reign that we want it to be, and it's not going to turn into that. I would almost rather them just lose the belts now so we can try again in the near future. In the same way that fucking when Kame and Jason Lee won the belts in 2022, they had 0 successful defenses, and we immediately got the belts off of them onto Dai and Kakuta. I don't understand it. I think they're leaving money on the table. I think this booking is atrocious, and I think the build of this match has fucking sucked.
Sadly, the build to the Open the Brave Gate championship match between Ryoya Tanaka and UT has sucked as well, but it's not been really because of booking. UT has been out essentially for the last month. It's right after booking this match, he got hurt with a back injury. And essentially, the build has been Tanaka cutting promos, calling out UT's health, and wondering why he's in this match, and kind of in a way questioning if this title defense is going to be kind of a boil on what has shaken up to be one of the 2 greatest Brave Gate title reigns of all time.
A lot of pressure for this match to be great. There's not a big story going into it other than UT once again losing in his hometown, which is a great story. So they really have to have a great match here. This will be defense number 10 for Tanaka. If you're keeping track, if they wanted him to break the defense record at Kobe World, he would need this match, one at the June Korakuen shows, and then they've got another Fukuoka doubleheader and a Kobe show on 6/29 that they could do another defense for before Kobe World. So if you're following that path, that is sort of the path they need to follow here. I mean, there's 0 reason for UT to win this match. I would be
absolutely not. He won it the last year at the last Dragon Gate show at Dolphins Arena. He can never win the Brave Gate title ever again. Like this is the most slam dunk. Tanaka gets V10. Like that's it.
I would be utterly devastated, and I love UT, but I would be utterly devastated if UT won this match. I just think it would be such a horrible decision. So let's hope that Tanaka... I would love to see Tanaka work more heel in this match, given that the crowd is going to be behind UT. I would really like to see him flex his muscles and be a dick a little bit. We'll see if that happens, but either way, I'm very excited for this match.
No, I'm with you on that. Tanaka, he had a match versus Kimura on the Hakata double shot that I feel like that they need to do that match over again, because he was being a little bit of a prick, and it was just like a little bit of uneasiness in that match that like I could tell that those two, that Tanaka as a prick with undercard or rookie Kazuma Kimura, there is a 4-star match there. We didn't get that in Hakata, but that kind of edge is what I want to see him doing in the UT match.
I have more thoughts on Kimura for later.
And the last title match, they opened the Dragongate Championship. The Natural Vibes, KZ, Gucci, and Aki defending against Takashi, a Problem Dragon, and Aichi native Koji Iwamoto.
I know this episode's already a little bit longer than the usual one is, but I have a thought exercise I would like to take you through, because I spent some time preparing it, Mike.
Oh, please do.
As I discussed 2 weeks ago, when this match was announced, I initially thought it was for Golden Colosseum. And as I was writing my written review, I tore into this match and talked about how awful it was and what a horrible use of everybody's time and energy it was for this match to be on a big show. And then I was briefly under the impression that it was going to take place on Problem Dragon's homecoming show. And I thought, oh, okay, well, nobody will ever see that match. It's Problem Dragon's homecoming show. Koji Iwamoto, I believe, is from the same place. Like, all right, fine, whatever. Right? Nobody's going to see it anyways. Doesn't matter. And then the match got added to this show. And I once again became irate. And I was running with the theory that on paper, this was the single worst title match that Dragongate has ever booked. So, Mike, I have gone through every title match that Dragongate has ever booked. We're going to go by belt. Dream, Brave, Twin, Triangle. We're going to go one belt at a time. It just so happened that I've got 6 matches for each of these titles, which was not the plan. It just worked out that way to where there were 6 of them on paper for each title that I was like, oh, that kind of sucks. So what you have to remember is we're looking at, on paper, does it look like an enticing match? And the context of when it were to happen, where the promotion was at, where these wrestlers were at, what it meant to the promotion. Was it exciting? Especially, anything 2012 or 2013 and beyond, I was living in real time, so I could remember those very well. There's a few that predate those, but that is the exercise at play here. Does that make sense?
Yep, I totally follow.
I'll go through these Dreamgate matches first. The ones I had listed: Susumu versus Pentagon Black, September 17th, 2006. Naruki Doi versus Akibono, May 5th, 2009. Shima versus Cyberkong, May 6th, 2012. Shingo versus Gamma, December 3rd, 2015. Yamato versus BB Hulk, November 3rd, 2021, because I remember you were really down on that. And Kai versus Takashi Yoshida, February 4th, 2022. Do any of those jump out to you as, on paper, being particularly atrocious? We know Shima versus Cyberkong in 2012 in reality was a horrible match. On paper, what jumps out to you there?
Oh, the Akibono and the Yoshida match. Yoshida was doing this whole, he has a cape and he's re-engaged in pro wrestling. Yoshida essentially, after he lost his mask and did the Teach Me Sensei storyline with Masaki Mochizuki, has been a whole bag of nothing in the promotion. It's wild how over he is in All Japan and how that's worked in like this, but he's been a net negative in most cases. And that match was the blight on Kai's title reign. And Akibono was not the kind of match that that Doi's title run needed, and they kept on doing all of these kind of outsiders or different kind of title matches for him at a certain point. And the Akibono one felt bad in the moment, and when they booked it, and it was bad when it happened. As someone who lived through that one, I can attest to those. So those are the two I would say.
And I think of that bunch, I think Kai versus Yoshida in 2022 is the worst Dreamgate match on paper, because that was Kai's first defense. It would turn into a great run. Right after this, you would have the Shimizu match, the Susumu match, which is one of the best Dreamgate matches ever, and then the unfortunately plagued Shuji Kondo match with the kickstart of the Kota Minoura debacle. But that Kai versus Yoshida match, when it was announced, it just sucked the air out of the building. Yoshida was past the point of being interesting at that point, because you're right, he had the Doi stuff and then the Mochizuki stuff, and that was over. And then they put Yoshida in that match, and it sucked. So, okay, we'll take Kai versus Yoshida from that bunch. In the Brave Gate division, I have Yasushi Kanda versus Jorge Rivera, August 13th, 2007. Ricochet versus KZ, March 25th, 2012. Genki Horiguchi versus Anthony Nese, November 3rd, 2013. KZ versus Problem Dragon, February 1st, 2015. Yasushi Kanda versus Punch Tamanaga, March 3rd, 2018. And Kaisuke Ikuda versus Punch Tamanaga, April 22nd, 2021.
So this is an interesting category because you have some of these that are kind of perfunctory ones, like the Nice one. Like Nice was on the tour, and it was like, okay,
I
Nice
put
is
the
gonna-
Nice one on the list because I feel like that match bothers you. I wasn't bothered at that because I'm watching Dragongate at this point in real time, so I was excited for it and I liked the match. But I feel like you really looked down on that Anthony Nice tour.
I just look down on Anthony Nice in general.
I do not. I think I like him quite a bit.
But the Tominaga ones, I mean, like, especially in the middle of the Akuta run, which I think that is, well, it just felt like out of tone so poorly with it. But the Nice one, you threw it on it just for bait. Like let's be honest.
But
I think
the Conda versus Punch match from Champion Gate 2018, that is the low point of the Brave Gate division. That is, to me, creatively the low point in Dragon Gate. And that weekend was entirely saved by Mochi versus Ben and the Dream Gate match. Because that was really when I was struggling with Dragon Gate, more so than even had they added Genki and Conda into the Twin Gate match for this show. But that was really... I really felt like the promotion was bad at that point, and that Conda versus Punch match to me was the absolute low point.
Yeah, and like you have to think like that Benkei title, that was his first title match, and it was like his first match above like 10 minutes as a singles wrestler. So like that was a big like a big gut check moment for Benkei. It was a no way it was no way a given that match was going to be that good. So going into the show, yeah, I think I have to go with Conda over the Akuta one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Twin Gate, I think luckily the Twin Gate matches historically have always been a little bit better than everything else. So this list is an odd one, but I had Speed Muscle versus SAT from January 16th, 2008. Doyama versus Gamma and Punch from December 27th, 2015. Kagatora and Susumu versus Naruki Doi and Brother Yashi from July 24th, 2016. Big R Shimizu and Eita versus Ryo Saito and Yasushi Kanda from November 4th, 2019. Masaki Mochizuki and Takashi Yoshida versus Araken and Yasushi Kanda from March 21st, 2021. And then just because it made me laugh when I saw it on the list, KZ and Big Boss Shimizu versus Little Guido and Ray J from MLW, February 4th, 2023.
Well, I mean, when you see Ray J having a Twin Gate match, you have to list it, right?
Unfortunately, I'm a big Little Guido advocate, but I'm not sure that he's Twin Gate caliber. I do love him historically, though, but that one stood out to me. I mean, the thing here is that for as great as that Doyama run was, that Gamma Punch match sucked, and I knew it was going to suck going into it. And I remember being really deflated in real time that Doi was teaming with Yashi on that Kobe World Show against Kagatora and Susumu, and then that match sucked as well. So those were the two that jumped out to me here, but there was nothing, I think, super offensive in the Twin Gate listing.
No, like an SAT, you have to think about like that was
a Wrestle Jam show, yeah.
Yeah. So like I put that up there with like Tony Nese. Like you can't really consider it with it. I that's not the punch match that I always defend with Gamma, I think. So
No, you've got a different weird punch match that you like, but it's not that one.
Yeah,
no,
I
think the one. Are you?
It's
thinking
a different
of,
Final Gate match.
Is it T-Hawk and Eita versus Yamato and Cyber Kong? Is that the one that you really like?
No. I think I really like this Gamma and Punch Tominaga versus Doyama match.
That match sucked. That was not a good match.
I thought that it worked. I thought that it really worked and was one of the only good things Over Generation ever did. Yes, now I fully remember that. So I'm removing that one from this list.
Yeah,
personally.
I don't think anything in the Twin Gate division is really an atrocity there.
Nah.
As for the Triangle Gate stuff, Akibono, Don Fuji, and Masaki Mochizuki versus Mazada, Nozawa, and Abdullah the Butcher from March 22nd, 2010.
You can stop. You can stop.
Well. KZ, Naoki Tanizaki, and Naruki Doi versus Fujita, Nozawa, and Kikuzawa from the 2011 Blood Warriors Produce show. Not much better, my friend. Genki, KZ, and Susumu versus Yoshida, Kanda, and Masato Tanaka from Kobe World 2018. I remember hating that match on paper.
Yeah.
The Strong Machines versus Diamante, Hyo, and Takashi Yoshida versus Genki, Susumu, and KZ from Final Gate 2019. You got to remember, It's 2019 Hyo, 2019 Diamante, 2019 Yoshida, and the Strong Machines way overstaying their welcome at that point. And then Seki Yoshioka, Yoshinari Ogawa, and Yuya Susumu versus Eita, Kotaro Suzuki, and Nozawa. This was on a Noah show from June 7th, 2022. And Dragon Kid, Punch Tamanaga, and Yamato versus Don Fuji, Takashi Yoshida, and the Bodyguard from Gate of Destiny 2023.
So I'm taking that one off the list because that was like, well, the last time the Punch Tominaga was a net positive.
Mm-hmm.
Like Punch Tominaga was the Triangle Gate champions. Like that was a great
and it was
storyline.
kind of fun. That match sucked and it sucked on paper, but the overall reign was not that bad.
Yeah, I think I have to go with the first Tokyo Gurentai match over the one from Blood Warriors Produce, because if for Blood, I think Produce shows you kind of get away with it a lot more versus like that Zetsurin's Triangle team. Like it's funny to me like how badly like Akibono was in that Dreamgate match, but I had to say like a net neutral as a Triangle Gate champion in a way. Like,
yeah, they have a really fun match against World 1. I forget what the combination is, but I really like that match.
Yeah. And like there's a non-title one like that like Tozawa's involved in at one point that was fun. But like I think you have to go with that first iteration of Tokyo Gurentai.
So in all, I think, even after looking through all these, I think KZ, Gucci, and Aki, for as great as they've been, I think them defending their titles against Yoshida, Problem Dragon, and Koji Iwamoto, who I don't even hate, but I don't want him on this show, and I don't want him in a Triangle Gate match. I think it's one of the worst title matches that Dragon Gate has ever booked. I think the two that I would feel comfortable putting above it would be Kai versus Yoshida, and I do think that Kanda versus Punch Bravegate match from 2018.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the worst title match they've ever put on paper, and that match was just atrocious as well. So I think Kanda versus Punch it is the winner. That is the worst title match they've ever booked, but at least on paper, given the context of the promotion, given the context of where these wrestlers are in their career and their current pushes, I think this is one of the worst title matches Dragon Gate has ever put on paper.
Yeah, no, I am. I don't think it's setting up Gucci and Aki. You know, I mean,
No.
like that's to me like this Triangle Gate reign is so important for getting like their sea legs as like fully fledged like roster members, and this is and even like putting aside the Iwamoto factor, it's just like this is not what you should be doing with this belt with this title run. Like doesn't make sense to me. Special singles match, Yuki Yoshioka versus Strong Machine J. Two guys kind of adrift at this point. And we'll see if this gets momentum for either of them. I mean, yeah.
It's a first time ever singles match, which is exciting. And I think this could be used to set up Yoshioka to challenge for the Dreamgate belt at Kobe World, because I still think that's a very strong possibility. And as of that, I do not think this match is an accident. I think that could once again be Yoshioka finding his groove, and we get Kakuta versus Yoshioka 4 in July. Don't rule it out.
And a undercard match that I do feel like that they're just kind of throwing it together, at least on one side. Gaja Dokuro, Kai, Ishin, Jason Lee, the three not really involved in anything on this show, face off against Love and Pieces, Hyo and Benkei, but they threw Luis Monte in here, so it does in a little bit you go like, oh, are we doing like a big hug kind of thing? But it's really who is all left over at this point.
And Junior's hurt, but
yeah,
I
Junior's
still
hurt.
You know, I don't know. Why can't Hyo, Ben, and Monte be the Triangle Gate team? Why, you know, it seems like a very easy fix, and that seems like something that would just dramatically change the way that I feel about this show. But instead, they're in match 3. They'll go 7 minutes. One of them will get kicked in the nuts, and we'll move on.
Match 2 is the Sugihara Trading Best Company contest. Jiro Shimbashi will be facing off against Jungle Kiona, who is returning to pro wrestling after a couple of years off due to injuries and surgeries. I as someone who was really like into like that pre-Bushi Road era of Stardom, it did pop me to see Jungle Kiona get this kind of booking. But yeah, I mean, it's not a strong X for Jiro. in a way, but I mean, it is an outside name for him on this kind of show. Like this is his role when he's not teaming with Kimura at this point. So, at least if you look at it where Shimbashi should be on the shows, like this is a success for him in a way.
Yeah, people seem into this. I have no feelings on it because I'm unfamiliar with his opponent, but people seem into this, so more power to him.
Junko Kiyono rocked. Like, it's a shame. Like everything, things. She was one of the people kind of left behind because of injuries and stuff during the Bushiroad transition. But like the 2018 2019 Jungle Kiyono rocked. The opener, you're going to have to make correct me if I'm wrong on this because the Facebook page doesn't have the full the corrected lineup. Masaki Mochizuki, Punch Tominaga, Don Fuji, and Kazuma Kimura versus Yamato, Dragon Kid, Genki Horiguchi, and Naruki Doi.
That's the correct lineup. I think my biggest takeaway from the Fukuoka doubleheader is I don't understand why they're not doing more with Kazuma Kimura. And I was like almost chastising myself sitting here thinking about that because I was trying to figure out a better Triangle Gate match with the way that this card is laid out. And I thought about Kimura instantly. And then I sort of talked myself out of that where I was like, well, he's under a year. I was like, well, wait, hold on. There's no rule that says
he's already had a Triangle Gate match.
Exactly. Not only that, but there's no rule that says you can't push a guy who's better than half the roster, or at least right now is performing better than half the roster, even if he's under a year into his career. The love and peace thing is a real hang up with me in this company right now. And the longer they do nothing with Kimura, and look, I don't need him to be a super rookie. I don't need him to be Shinsuke Nakamura. But the more time that I spend with him when he's not doing anything relevant, it is just going to eat away at me because he is clearly ready for something more than what he's doing. And I don't know why they're not doing anything with him.
Yeah, I mean, he was really fun in the match with Jason. I think that Tanaka match was fun, but it definitely felt like it could have been a little something more to it. But I feel like Kimura could have been involved in the Triangle Gate scene. Like he could have teamed up with Ben and Hio and challenged them. Like that would have made total sense. Like he had a Triangle Gate match in his first month. Like it's totally fine.
Think about how much more interesting this show is if it's Ben, Hio, and Kimura in that Triangle Gate match, and then you just move the Problem Dragon Yoshida Iwamoto team into that Jason Lee Kai Ishin 6-man tag, and you just get that done with, and we all move on with our lives. We watch that match for the 5 minutes that it exists, and then we're done there. And again, slide Monte into Kimura spot in the opener, and you've got a totally different card. You've got a totally different card. Kimura is so good. He is so good, and I already feel like they're wasting him.
No, I'm totally with you on this. Like, there is a much better card you could put together by just reorganizing things, and that is, other than going back and booking an entire different cage match. That is the easy change that you would do to get the best change on this card.
But it's we'll put a bow on it this way and we'll get out of here. I think the Dragongate USA lineup could have been a really fun show, and I thought they put together maybe the worst possible card with those names involved. And I think the problem that we're seeing with Dragongate in 2026 is you and I both loved that, or I'm assuming we both loved, Kame and Rita versus Shun and Cielo versus who was the third team on that Fukuoka show?
On the afternoon,
Shun and Cielo versus
Monte.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, it was Monte Tanaka, Kame Rita, Cielo Shun. That match was unbelievable. I went 4 stars on that. I thought it was a notebook match.
3 3/4. Yeah.
And it's the type of thing that we're just not getting. This company has done the opposite of the Paul Heyman this year, where it seems like they're finding everybody's worst characteristics and doubling down on those, and they're finding people with the least amount of chemistry and latching onto those partnerships. And we're seeing cards that have talent in there, but the talent is being used in the least interesting way possible. And I think that was prevalent on the Dragongate USA stuff, and I think that's really prevalent on Golden Colosseum. And I think this show has a very large hurdle to overcome. You know, you got to hope that Yoshioka versus Strong Machine J is not a throwaway match. You have to hope that UT is healthy enough to have a great Brave Gate match. I think the Twin Gate booking is going to really bother me, and it's unfair to them, but I sort of have a 4.5 star expectation. Luckily, historically, when I've had that for Kame, he's cleared that with ease, but I'm expecting not a great match, but a match of the year contender type of match from that Twin Gate match. And then you have this cage match that I'm not into at all, and I don't have a feel for it. I'm not invested in it. I would like for both units to go away. And so if this is going to be a great show, this has to be a really great show, and I'm not sure right now this company has it in them.
Yeah, like that three-way, the big note I have on that from the afternoon show is, hey, here's a wild idea. Why don't we take our most talented guy in the roster and have his best opponents against him, and then have a match based off of that all the time? Because you had Jack with Monte and with Shun, and you had others like Rita with Shun and Monte and Tanaka throughout it. It's like, it was such like a simple, like, well, no shit, why don't you do this every night? And that is not kind of the area we have going into that show. And yeah, it's going to have like such a level of difficulty for this to be a successful show in the way that we kind of view it as a successful show, that I just, it would have to take like Yoshioka and then Strong Machine J having instant chemistry and having a 20-minute belter. Like, you would need to have like something like that to happen if these title matches don't follow through and if the cage match is kind of a dud. And even that, you're not saving the show. And the thing that's also kind of frustrating is that we still have one more network show happening on Friday from Sambo Hall, where they're doing almost the full cage match without without Kakuta. Kakuta's doing Champion Carnival as the main event with Saipatra versus Minoli and Kato. So they're still trying to do some final build stuff, but I don't see necessarily anything that's going to kind of carry on or would add to the show in any sort of way, because they have Jackie and Rita against Paradox, so you're not having a way there to get Horiguchi and Kanda involved in any sort of imagination. The only other thing that I see on this show on Friday, that one last thing before we get out of here, Rhea Fuda on the show, which that's kind of nice to see. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting weekend. And by the next time we talk, Case, we will have Golden Colosseum in our review, and we'll be here to make sense of where Dragongate is on their road to Kobe World 2026.
That's all I got, Mike.
Yep, that's all I got too. But you can follow us on social media, Open Voice Gate. Case is at _ in your case. I'm at Fujiheya. The Open the Voice Gate channel on the Discord is a great place for our show updates, match listings, all of that. We've gone long this week, but we'll be back with you next week to talk about Golden Colosseum. Take care, everyone.
Hello, do you like New Japan Pro Wrestling? Are you a Shin Nihon freak? If so, check out the Super J-Cast with Joel and Damon on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.
And even if you fucking hate New Japan Pro Wrestling, listen to the Super J-Cast anyway. Not just for our great show reviews, analysis, and pastrami sandwiches, but there's also usually some dick jokes somewhere in the obligatory opening 30 minutes of absolute nonsense we chat about every single week. That's the Super J-Cast for all the best talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, crisps, and pornography.